We continue now at the top of Daf Chav Tes Amud Aleph from Meseches Bava Kamma. This is Bava Kamma Daf 29a. And the previous Amud, the Gemara was discussing the machlokas in the Mishnah between the Tana Kamma and Rabbi Yehuda. Let's say a person drops his jug in the Rosh Hashanah and it breaks and it does damage. The Tana Kamma said chayiv, and Rabbi Yehuda said chayiv only in a situation where the person had kavana. And Rab explains Rabbi Yehuda in the Mishnah that Rabbi Yehuda means that if it was a situation of ones, then the person would be potter. And so Abai asked on Rab, if you're saying that according to Rabbi Yehuda by onus potter, it sounds like according to the Tana Kamma, which we identify as Rabbi Meir, that by onus the person would be chayiv. But how could that be the case? Don't we say onus rachmana patre? And Rabbi said, no, we don't say onus rachmana patre in this case, and that actually is the machlokas between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda applies the rule of onus rachmana patre. If it's an accident, the person is potter, and Rabbi Meir does not apply that rule. And the Gemara is now in the middle of asking from a brisa which will show that Rabbi Meir does actually agree, onus rachmana patre. The brisa started out, let's say a person's jug breaks and the person doesn't remove it from where he's supposed to remove it, or let's say the person's camel falls down in the middle of the Rosh Hashanah, he doesn't remove it when he's supposed to remove it. So Rabbi Meir says chayiv, and the brisa says that according to the Chachamim, pater midinei adam v'chayiv b'dinei shamayim. The person is pater in terms of the earthly courts, that will be explained later on, but he's chayiv b'dinei shamayim, he does have to pay in the heavenly courts. As Rashi says, v'chayiv b'dinei shamayim mishum delo sala, because he didn't remove these obstacles when he should have removed them. And the brisa continues, umodim chachamim l'Rabbi Meir. Now the chachamim admit to Rabbi Meir ba'avno sakino maso she'nichon b'rosh gago. Let's say his stone or his knife or his package, he places it on top of his roof. V'naflu b'ruach mitzui, and it falls from a common wind. V'yiziko, and they do damage. Shu chayiv, that he's certainly chayiv in that case because it was a ruach mitzuya. And the brisa continues, umodim Rabbi Meir l'Rabbanan, and Rabbi Meir admits to the Rabbanan b'malek kankanin alagag, if a person puts pitchers on the top of his roof, al manas l'nagavon, in order to dry them out. V'naflu b'ruach she'ena mitzuya, and they fall from an uncommon wind. V'yiziko, and they do damage. So that's considered to be an onus. It's a total accident. Shu potter, he's potter. And the point of bringing this brisa is it's clear from Rabbi Meir that he does apply onus rachmana patre, and therefore the Mishnah cannot be explained the way Rab explained the Mishnah. And so the Gemara continues, Alamar Abaya, rather Abaya says, Betarti pligi. There's actually a machlokas over here. There's two separate arguments within the Mishnah. Pligi b'shas nefila, or pligi la'achar nefila. They're arguing as the item is falling, and they're also arguing after the item has fallen. Rashi explains, Alamar Abaya, rather Abaya says, Betarti pligi b'mas nisin. There's two arguments in the Mishnah. Keshehizik hakad b'shas nefila. First of all, a situation where the jug damages as it's falling. Upligi keshehuzik b'charosav la'achar nefila. And also they're arguing, let's say there was damage done from the shards after it has already fallen. There's two arguments within the Mishnah. And Abaye continues to explain, Pligi b'shas nefila, the argument at the time that it's falling, that's beniskal poshea. That argument is, do we say that when a person stumbles, that's considered negligence? Mar savar niskal poshea, one holds that a person stumbles, it is considered to be negligence. Umar savar niskal lav poshea, and the other one holds a person stumbles is not considered to be negligence. And then pligi la'achar nefila, then there's also a machlokas after the item already falls, b'mafkir nizakov, in a situation where a person declares that which causes the damage ownerless. Mar savar mafkir nizak of chayiv. One says that if a person declares these things ownerless, he's still chayiv. Mar savar pater, but the other one says once he declares they're ownerless, it's not his anymore, so he is pater. And Rashi explains, b'mafkir nizakov, we're talking about a situation again where he makes those items that damage, he makes them ownerless. Kagon zeh, like in this case, the mistama mafkir lecharasav. Mistama, he made these shards, he made them ownerless. Rabbi Meir savar mafkir nizakov chayiv. Rabbi Meir holds that if somebody makes it ownerless, he's still chayiv. The bor shechayiva all of Torah bebor b'rosh hasaram the hefker chayiva, because that's exactly the case of bor in the Torah. The case of bor in the Torah is a bor b'rosh hasaram, which is ownerless. Rabbi Yehuda the savar pater says pater. Srilei the hifkir reshuso v'lo hifkir bo rozeh bor ha'amr b'Torah. The Torah, when it talks about bor, is talking about, yes, his property, the area is going to be ownerless, but the actual bor is not ownerless. That's what the Torah was talking about. Well, the Kamon pligi Rabbi Shmuel, Rabbi Kiva b'hamilsa, and later on Rabbi Shmuel and Rabbi Kiva argue in this matter, and that's why Rabbi Yehuda would hold in a situation where it's completely ownerless, the person will be pater. V'hachi Kamma Rabbi Yehuda. Now, according to this explanation of Abai, this is how we read Rabbi Yehuda in the Mishnah. B'miskaven l'shovra v'hizik b'nefila chayiv. If he has intention to break it and it does damage as it's falling, so then he's chayiv. Uv'she'ein miskaven. However, if he's not having intention, ela miskaven lahorida michseifo v'niskal. But what happens is he lowers it from his shoulder. That's his only intention, and then he stumbles v'nishbar and it breaks. So potter. So in that situation, he's going to be potter. The point being, the niskal la poshayu, stumbling according to Rabbi Yehuda is not negligent, so he's potter. And Rabbi Meir, the Tana Kamma, would disagree and say niskal is posheya. The Gemara will explain how do you explain the word miskaven in the Mishnah when we're talking about damage that is done after nefila. But in any case, those are the two arguments within the Mishnah. And the Gemara continues, umimayin, from where do we know that there are actually two arguments within the Mishnah? Midikatani tarti, because the Mishnah has two separate cases. Hochlak echad b'mayim. First, it has somebody slips in the water, or he gets injured by the shards. So isn't that exactly the same? Elalav hachi kamar, rather is it not? That's exactly what it's saying. Hochlak echad b'mayim b'shas nefila. When it talks about the water that's at the time that it's falling, oshalaka b'charasas la'achar nefila, or the person gets injured by the shards after it falls. And therefore we see there's a double machlokus again in the Mishnah. And the Gemara continues, umidemas nisan betarti. Now, if in the Mishnah there's a double machlokus again between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda, so Braisa nami betarti, so the Braisa we just quoted above, which also involved the Chachamim and Rabbi Meir, that also would be a double machlokus. And the Gemara says, Bishlam Makada. Now I understand, we're talking about the pitcher, Mashkachas la o b'shas nefila o la'achar nefila. Again, the case of the Brisa was, the person's kad breaks, you can have two kinds of damage. Again, one can be b'shas nefila as it's falling. You can also have a case la'achar nefila, there could be a double machlokas. Ela gemala, but what about the case of the camel which falls, which he should have removed? B'shlama la'achar nefila mashkachas la. I understand you can have a damage after it falls. Again, that's a situation where you should have taken it away. B'mafkir nivlasa, the case could be that it fell, and he made the nevela, he made that carcass ownerless. So you have a machlokas whether this ownerless thing, whether the person's responsible or not. Ella b'shas nefila hechem ashkachasla. But at the time of falling, how do you have a case involving the camel? And Rashi explains, Ella b'shas nefila, at the time of falling, hechi ikol meimar niskal posheyahu. How are you going to come up with a scenario where the person stumbles and he's negligent? Mahu yachol lasos im niskal behemta. What's he supposed to do if his animal stumbles? That's certainly not posheya. Tebishlama niskal hu v'nishbar akado. We understand, let's say he stumbles and then the kad breaks. Ikol meimari boile luyune omezel. We could say he had to look where he's going. Ella gemalo mikol meimar hachi. Can you say that by the camel? So how can we interpret by the camel a situation of a machlokus in terms of niskal posheya or niskal la posheya? And so the Gemara answers, Amar Ravacha says, Kegon de Ovra b'maya derech shirata de nahara. What happens is he was walking with his camel along the overflowing part of the river, and that's what caused the stumbling. And so therefore it really was a negligence to take the animal on that route. But the Gemara asks, hey Chidami, but what exactly is the case? If there was another way to go, Posheyahu, he's certainly going to be negligent in that case. It wouldn't even be a machlokas. And if there's no other way to go, so onesus, and then we're back to a situation where it's certainly an onus, and he's not responsible. And so the Gemara instead says, Ela mashkachas la, rather the way to find such a case is the askila where he himself stumbled, the askila begamla, and then his camel stumbled over him, and so you have a machlokas in the brisa whether him stumbling is considered a negligence or not. And the Gemara continues, Mafkir Nizakav. Well, if you're saying one of the machloks in between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda is when he declares the item ownerless, but my miskavinika, so how are we going to explain the word miskavin in the Mishnah? Rabbi Yehuda mentions the word miskavin, and the Gemara says to that, Amar Rav Yosef says, B'miskavin lizkos b'charasa is very simple. According to Rabbi Yehuda was saying if there's intention to be zochet, to own the shards, meaning it's not ownerless, only then Rabbi Yehuda says chayev. But if it's ownerless, Rabbi Yehuda would say potter. And likewise Rav Ashi says, B'miskavin lizkos b'charasa. The case of the Mishnah according to Rabbi Yehuda is he's chayiv if he was miskavin, if he had kavana again to own the shards, but if it's ownerless he's potter, and that's the machlokas again between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda. And Rashi explains lizkos b'charase shelo hifkiron chayiv, meaning if it's not ownerless he's chayiv. Uv'shein miskavin shav lizkos ben potter, but if he did not have that kavana, so then it's potter. The mafker nezak of potter, because again according to Rabbi Yehuda, if he declares the items ownerless that caused the damage, so then he's going to be potter. And the Gemara continues with another explanation of the machlokas in the Mishnah. Rebbe Elazar says, B'shas nefila machlokas. There is in fact a machlokas at the time the items are falling. Avola achar nefila. But the Gemara says, but according to that explanation, so let's say after the items have fallen, so what's the halacha? Divrei hakol potter. Then you're suggesting that everybody says potter. Vayikar Rabbi Meir de mechai. But isn't it clear that Rabbi Meir would say chayiv in that case? And Rashi explains, we see that clearly in the Braisa. It says velo silka. It says he didn't remove the items. Velo hamida, he didn't stand up the camel. That clearly sounds like we're talking about some kind of damage happening after the items fell. And Rabbi Meir said chayiv, so you can't say that everybody agrees la'achar nefila is going to be potter. So then the Gemara says, well, elamai. So rather, what can we suggest according to Rabbi Lazar? If the machlokas is b'shas nefila, so divrei akol chayiv, so everybody is going to agree chayiv la'achar nefila. But that also doesn't make sense. Vayikar rabbanan the patri, because in that very same case, the rabbanan are saying in the brisa potter. And so therefore, elamai b'shas nefila. So rather, what does it mean when Rabbi Lazar says there's a machlokas at the time the items are falling? It means af b'shas nefila. It means even at the time the items are falling. The kamash malon kidi Abai, and he's teaching us what Abai said. Rashi explains af b'shas nefila. Rabbi Lazar means even at the time of the nefila. When we shom delishna de brisa lo mishtama b'shas nefila. The point over here is that the language of the brisa, it actually didn't sound like there was a machlokas at the time the items were falling, and that's what Rabbi Lazar's chiddush was. Itzrich l'Rebbe Lazar lashminan. So Rabbi Lazar was coming to teach us that chiddush in the brisa, the daikinan lami masisan, that we can see that from the Mishnah, the katani tarti, that it's talking about two cases. Kedamar Abai le'el, like Abai said earlier, that you can be medayik from the Mishnah that there's a double machlokas, and Rabbi Lazar saying even though that doesn't sound like it from the language of the brisa, that's what's going on in the brisa, and we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Chof Tes Amud Beis.